Welcome to another presentation of the Globe Sound Healing Conference. Today we have Meredith Sands Keator. Welcome, Meredith.
Thank you, David. Thanks so much for having me.
Meredith Sands Keator was raised in a family lineage of stretch and healing, originated through her Finnish heritage, and is the director of the Somatic Stretch International Training Program. She was trained extensively on shiatsu and acupuncture, and over the past 25 years has developed an extensive understanding of human anatomy and its relationship to frequency and geometry. Teaching therapists of all modalities in her method of neural resonance therapy, based on this approach, and the general public through the somatic stretch, she offers a refreshing new depth to health and healing through the incorporation of geometry and anatomy that coincides with our recent findings in physics and the fractal nature of the universe. Go to geometryofhealing.com for more information. Cool. What have you been up to lately?
In a land of fascination, lost in the body somewhere. Yeah, much like you, lost in the world of sound. Yeah, it's been a very long 25-year journey. And I'm really excited to be at the point now in my life where I can actually share what it is that has been my personal obsession and this land of learning that we have in these temples that we walk in.
Nice.
So thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome. So here's the big question. If you had all the money in the world, what would you do to help people on the planet?
I think I would start by figuring out how to delegate some work so that I can actually do more of the sharing and less of the working behind it. But honestly, I think I would be doing the same thing, whether I've been broke, whether I'm broke or whether I've really had all the money in the world. This is what I do. And I think it really does serve people both in their own personal healing or as therapists working on bodies, but even more so when we're looking at Eastern and Western medicine and where the fusions are. It's a really exciting area that I just found myself in many years ago. And I couldn't do anything else. It's just what I love. It's what I'm crafted to do. But I would say that I would also take more time to do my own personal practice, and I would get involved more in sound healing. I'm new to that idea of it. I have my own blocks in my own voice and sharing and my insecurities. But interestingly, what I wanted to share this morning today for the sound healing meditative part of it that you suggested we start with, it's actually a chant that came out of the body for me, and I've recorded a couple of them and I hope more come. And so to be surrounded by people really working with sound healing and the kind of nature of work that you're doing really draws me a lot. I would spend a lot more time doing
I get excited about actually using the work that I know of with frequencies and figuring out the whole frequency and music body, and then adding in the sacred geometry, and then the body and the whole system wouldn't have a chance except to heal.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's fascinating once we start really working with frequency. And so whether it's biological, there's so much there. I think that work is really in service to humanity because it's really where we're fusing what happened in the past and what's happening in our contemporary world to really point to the future of what health and healing is. And I think sound resonance is critical in that journey.
Okay. So you want to start with the meditation?
Sure. Yeah. I'll screen share. It's actually a video that I'm going to show.
Okay. Okay, cool.
A little bit of an idea about the visuals we're going to be going to in the body. My intention today at the end of this hour, even though first of all, I don't want people to get overwhelmed because there's a lot of information available. I just want people to absorb some images, some ideas. What people mostly say is that their nervous system is responding to the work. So I want people to not even don't be analytical as we're going through it. Just let it wash over you because there's a lot for your brain to grab onto in other things that I offer or that your body, if you want to use it more practically. So this is a little brief thing that at the end, I want people to really feel that they have some tools that they've just naturally absorbed. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a video that shows you pictures while one of these chants that I've channeled. Is that the one that just
downloaded?
Yeah. Shall I start sharing my screen now?
Cool.
Okay.
Oh.
Camera on. That, great. Okay. Here we are.
Got it.
Great. Okay. So we're going to be talking about fractal anatomy, frequency, and the geometry of healing, frequency being your nervous system. And so it's great if you have earphones on, something that you can really hear the upcoming video. And you don't have to watch the video, the video portion of it. You can just close your eyes and listen. And it's just a very repetitive chant, and just open your body and relax. Just take a moment to breathe deeply into your body. Maybe close your eyes. And just imagine that the interior of your body has a whole story to tell of where tensions begin, where our mind begins to hold our breath, and begins to pull from the interior. And as it pulls in this web of woven body that we are, it starts to pull on areas that can pull down on your shoulder and pull into your neck and hold into your lower back. And so these pains and aches that we have on a daily basis are actually coming from the interior. And today we're just going to look at the possibilities of what might be there, opening our minds to the arena of greater sensitivity and awareness in our own bodies. And so when you're ready, just slowly coming back into the room. And I'll just continue with a little bit of a story of who I am.
Pull your mic a little closer to your mouth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Test.
That's much better. Thanks.
I tend to speak quietly. Okay. Thank you. So, it's not letting me go. There we go. So I come from a lineage that I carry on, we call somatic stretch. My grandfather is in the top corner there. He was from Finland, and he created one of the first massage practices in Toronto, Canada, back in the 30s, before anyone really knew what massage was. So it was kind of trippy that I ended up going into shiatsu and then acupuncture. It wasn't really expected that was going to be my direction. But my grandfather just stretched to live. It was something I remember growing up and seeing him. He would always stretch naked on the veranda in the morning, a very brown body, and he would have herbs that he had foraged in the morning and have weird concoctions he would drink that I wish I could ask him more about now. And my mother was a very well-known dancer with the National Ballet of Canada. So my grandfather worked on a lot of the company, and she was through her dance career. And then in that furthest picture on the right there, that's my mother, probably around 70, I'd say. She's 90 now, still teaching on Saturdays if you want to come play with us. And she created this method out of the stretching that comes through my grandfather. And I went on to continue to create a training program out of it so that we could reach more people with it. And it's different from the point of view that we're really working with stretching by relaxing and shifting what we're doing with the stretch reflex to really open and increase flexibility really easily, and also help reduce injury at the same time. Now, what's interesting is that as geometry started to appear in my own sensory experience, I went to shiatsu school for a 2-year full-time program and then went on to study acupuncture. And in between those two things, I had a very powerful experience of a really energetic nature that made my nervous system really quite sensitive. And I started to see and feel planes of energy moving through the body. And I started to want to track what it was and try to piece it together. And so I failed math in high school. Geometry is not my thing at all, in the least. But I was just trying to track planes of energy. And these geometries started forming. And a recent friend that I had met from Finland sent me a picture and said, look what your ancestors have been doing for years. Now, this woman is named Aya Koski. She's a beautiful, wonderful woman. And she's a maker of what's called himmeli, Himmelli. And these himmeli are something that in Finland they make and they hang over their tables at Christmas, their Christmas decorations. They come out during sacred time. In Finland, all of this rye and then harvested it and dries it, and then takes a needle and thread and makes these really incredible, beautiful geometries. So what I find so amazing is that my ancestors have always been doing this. I've never really had a very strong connection to my ancestry, particularly until this started happening. And so the picture on the right here is also more of her incredibly beautiful, intricate. Imagine drying stalks of rye to be this precise and then threading everything. It's a really incredible art. And interestingly, it looks an awful lot of the kinds of geometry that we are seeing in physics today. So this is an isotropic vector matrix that Buckminster Fuller coined. There's a lot of work of Nassim Haramein where he's working with a whole aspect and geometry in and around that IVM. And I'm not going to go a lot into the theory of all that because there is a lot available to check out. But just from the visual of seeing really what it is that we're starting to map, and really what we're mapping are patterns in the universe. And I say that the geometry is not the source of energy, but it's an agent for the human mind to witness the invisible in action. And so if we were fish swimming in water, we wouldn't necessarily have a concept of the idea of water, and yet it's the very reason that the fish can breathe and swim and move. And really, we're in that kind of phase where we're looking at what our environment is, all of this air that has all of these different rays for the internet to work, and cosmic rays and alpha rays and gamma rays and X-rays. And so what would it look like if we could see it? And it's almost as if the geometry is a timeless symbol that supersedes epochs and languages and cultures and tells a story at the same time. And so this is the story that the body started to teach me within that. So now I'm going to take you through a 10-minute video. This is, I pulled this from my Fractal Anatomy and Geometry of Healing program, which is a compilation of the 25 years of my work of really showing where the bridges between East and West are. I'll explain that a little more later. But I took out a part where we were discussing meridians and crafted it a little bit to work for a meridian mastery program that I'm just about to launch. And that's really just going over meridians and what they mean. And so I thought to give you a little bit more information, whether you know meridians or not, this will have some different information in it. And if you don't know anything about them, it will teach you, give you an idea about them so that you can learn more about the different concepts in the body. Meridians, well, it will say what meridians are. So if you want to just sit back and watch this for 10 minutes, please enjoy the ride. Within the meridian system, wide, complex, and layered routes have been converted into an efficient shorthand for busy practitioners using needles. That this shorthand is so extensive, consistent, and thorough is testimony to just how comprehensive the original bank of Chinese medical knowledge must have been and how far-sighted the meridian chart's originators actually were. The meridians, shrugged one student not so long ago, are just lines drawn on the body. But this is much like saying, when looking up at the vastness of the night sky, that the stars are only white dots on black canvas. Meridians are considered by many to be a means of tracking the nervous system. They're a roadmap of the body left by the ancient Chinese physicians who used this knowledge to read distortion in the body and used this insight to heal through a deeper understanding of what we now call bioelectricity. Bioelectricity is the term for electric potentials and currents produced by or occurring within living organisms. Bioelectric potentials are generated by a variety of biological processes and generally range in strength from 1 to a few hundred millivolts. That's what we know so far. Now consider what happens when we take a crystal and shine light through it. You can't see anything until it hits something solid, like a wall. If we drew a solid line between the colors displayed on the wall and then removed the crystal, we would see only 6 lines, and it would seem to carry very little meaning. It's interesting that there are 6 lines of meridians on both the upper and lower parts of the body.
The lines left on the wall represent an entire process of refracted light frequency, and those lines are a two-dimensional example that signify a great deal more at work before colors appeared on the wall. Keep in mind, too, that you can't even see the colors until they arrive at the wall. Meridians are like this, with the invisible not being seen until it hits something solid, where we can see it and trace it, like on the skin. Forget for a moment that the meridians you see in 2D on the body is all there is to see, and pretend that you can see the meridians as something more like sunlight that shines, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Consider the skin as a thin, visible layer of tissue paper between the inner world and the outer world. Imagine the people who came before us who could see and sense these frequencies well enough to leave us a map on the skin of our bodies to tell of the energies that exist before physical form. However, the meridian system we learn today is a shorthand version of complex layered roots that represent a very extensive system of knowledge. Japanese sensei Tetsuro Sato writes in his book on Shinso Shiatsu, "It's hard to imagine a single chart illustrating the body's multiple meridian systems, their interrelationships, point conjunctions, and connections. That the sages of long ago untangled the web and designed a map of the essentials is an accomplishment that remains unsurpassed to this day." The rainbow on the wall example, as well as the electromagnetic spectrum, illustrate that frequency expresses itself as bands of light, among the other rays of the spectrum that we also can't see. It would be rational to assume that if the frequency surrounds us, it is within us. How can frequency constitute all the heavens, the stars, the cosmos, our planet, our telephones and technologies, and yet not apply to our bodies and minds? We have not yet traced the frequencies beyond the electromagnetic spectrum. Our physical reality lies ready to unfold within the spectrum's more distant discoveries. Here's a fractal idea. Fractal meaning a pattern that remains the same even while it scales from small to large. Before we make a house or a shirt or a table or a chair, we have the thought. Between the thought and the thing we make, we have a blueprint. Even if it's something as simple as a chair, we will have drawn out what we want to do before we do it. Meridians and other Eastern energy systems are the blueprint of the human body between wherever the thought of us came from and the body that we live in. Western medicine does not yet acknowledge the energy, and therefore the blueprint of the body, and can do only something once something has become manifest in the physical form. Illness is not detectable on a more subtle level in Western medicine until it becomes obvious. Eastern medical systems focus much more on the blueprint to effect change to the physical, preferably before illness occurs, but even afterwards. The difference between fixing ourselves or fixing a house we've built is that the body is a living, pulsing organism, and therefore more adaptable to change than a solid, inanimate structure. There are 12 primary meridians that correlate to organ systems, and 2 more taken from what are called the 8 extraordinary meridians that correlate to different energy patterns to make 14 meridians in total. These 2 extra meridians, borrowed from the 8, are called Ren and Du, and they essentially bisect the body, one running down the middle of the front from top to tail, and one running down the middle of the back. In acupuncture school, we're taught that Ren and Du are 2 connected but different lines, hence its description of running down the front or back. However, I encourage you to consider them as one single plane of light or energy that runs as a continual line through the body instead of around it from top to tail back up to the top again. This is essential to considering the frequencies of the body, that these lines are actually planes of energy moving from one side of the body or arm or leg to the other. One thing that confuses those less familiar with the meridian system when working with practitioners such as acupuncturists or shiatsu therapists is that we hear lung and we assume this means that something may be wrong with our lungs. This may or may not be true because the meridians are more like tarot cards than how we perceive an organ to be in the West. The meridians speak to distortions prior to outcome. They speak to the subtle fluctuations in conversation that the body goes through while living. Just because you talk about building a house doesn't mean you've already built it. And in that conversation, there is room for much change. Just because you talk about an organ, it doesn't mean that it's damaged. It means it may need some help, or it may be a signpost merely offering an indication of the weather inside that day. We can also consider that meridians look much like dermatomes, which are the zones on our bodies that Western medicine has found to be sections on the skin that are innervating a particular area of skin, giving us the ability to feel sensation due to a nerve feeding an area of the body. However, we would not consider the zone on the skin to exist on its own. We know it comes from deep inside, communicating from the interior, where the peripheral nerves speak to the brain and the spinal cord, the depths communicating with the exterior. Consider how much we can learn about meridians when we start to see the angles and planes that energy creates. Geometry naturally forms out of these otherwise straight or jagged lines on the body to reveal an intricate inner dance that also follows the ancient understanding of geometric precision in all things. So as we move through other energy systems of the body, and we consider planes of charge or currency moving through the body, think beyond the two-dimensional lines you can see and appreciate the depth that is involved. Let's look at the meridians as stars in the night sky and read beyond the superficial to consider their depth, the story they tell, and the paths revealed to us from the inside out.
See the importance of what can really begin to happen when we understand a lot more about where Eastern and Western medicine meet. And we're at such an exciting time right now where we actually are bringing together a lot of information. For instance, even the idea that the meridians are very jagged, they'll do loops and different things. And there's some amazing Japanese research that explains why that is, which we don't commonly hear about in acupuncture school. And so the ability to, I think meridians are one of the easiest ways for people to really begin to absorb some of the Eastern medical theory without having to study and understand all of it, and still be able to use some practical ways to actually work with their own health and healing and track a little bit of what needs a little bit of extra help or support, instead of us feeling kind of helpless, like we always have to just hand over everything to somebody else to try to fix. There's so much that it's so important that we have facilitators on both the West and the Eastern side to be able to support us when we're going through something. And it's also really important to have our own sense of personal empowerment about being able to read the weather inside and what we can actually do with it. So why is it doing this? There we go. So we're beginning to view the world a lot more with this sort of matrix idea of being able to witness the invisible in action a little bit more. And I'm finding it surprising how much this kind of idea is showing up. Even down the street, there's a dentist's office and there's a big tooth in the window, a painting of a tooth, and it's got this crisscross same sort of thing all over it. So we're beginning to really understand that there are patterns underneath, which are what we call fractals today, and that they're underneath actually really moving everything. And we're beginning to become aware of the water that we're swimming in. And there's only so much we can be swimming in the knowledge of that water before we realize that what the East has been talking about and what the West does in its life-saving techniques definitely have to be integrated, just as the unified field theory in science has to be able to understand where the world of relativity and the quantum world make sense together. So I see biologically, we're in the same path and the same journey as we are in physics to be able to understand the links between these two worlds. So as I began to go through all of this work in the body, and as the body was teaching me more and more, as I worked client by client and stretch class by stretch class, I began to realize that it wasn't just neural frequencies. I was beginning to really see planes of energy moving through the body and specific intersection points where they meet. And that's where all the theory is involved in it. But I think the pictures speak for themselves in many ways. And what I began to realize eventually is that it's not just the nervous system, it's light, in fact. And I thought that we, as a species, as a science, that we understood light. And apparently we don't understand all about light, just like we don't understand everything about electricity either, which was news to me because I figured if you turn the light on and it works and the sun shines, then we must have it sorted out. But no. So the idea of light is a really important one that I think is what the body is actually illustrating, is that essence of life. And light and sound are very connected. And there's something that I heard many years ago that I haven't found. If anybody finds a link to this, please do let me know. I heard many years ago that Russian scientists, in search for understanding how the neural impulses and the frequencies of the bodies were working, had discovered that the nervous system doesn't really run on electrical charge as much, because if it did, apparently there would be heat that would emanate from the nervous system itself, which it doesn't do, apparently. Please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I heard this years ago and it was fascinating. And because I like to back up all my work, everything online is backed up. But this one's fascinating. They said apparently that it was more like sound that was working. It was more the frequency of sound that was working more with the nervous system. And I find it interesting that this theory of the pyramids and how they could have possibly built something that we couldn't possibly build today had something to do quite possibly with sound and movement and being able to create levitation of things in order for things to move because of sound. So again, I see a place where the body and the science of sound healing are very much one and the same. And so you can see, I want to give a shout out to the art of claytaylor.com. Clay Taylor is somebody who I've met through colleagues, and he takes these incredible photographs. And this is a sphere, this is a glass sphere that he shone light through and took a picture of. And I just love where you can see all the direct angles of what's happening. And I love the fact, as you see in the video, that it really does coincide very much, really almost identically, with the kinds of planes that I was noticing in the body and where they would cross over and where intersection points would happen, and that those were really important areas to get into. So I'm going to start to share more of that. Again, this idea of light moving through the body, your spine and your nervous system, your brain and your spinal cord and all of your peripheral nerves are this activity in motion. When you touch your fingertips, it's like being able to touch your brain, because this is where the whole system is working. And it's funny that we talk about the nervous system, because my nervous system is talking to your nervous system, talking about itself. And that is a very trippy concept, I think, that sometimes keeps me awake at night trying to figure out. It's sort of like the one hand clapping. So when we're looking at light in the body, the idea that this core central nature of the body is where all of the activity is, and it's running everything else. And so when we consider the physical body to just be like thin tissue paper that has no differentiation whatsoever between the inner world and the outer world, we can start to really appreciate, just if we're looking at even one area of the body. And I'm using the chakra system because it's what's most familiar to us in the West. But keep in mind too, that something Nassim Haramein says is that every proton is a black hole. And in what I go through in the physics aspect of it is understanding that every black hole is a singularity. And that would mean that we would have as many chakras in our body as the trillions of cells that we have. And of course, we have to look from the small to the large. So let's just consider, for instance, this chakra in and around the solar plexus. And if it kept going, it would just be one great big beam of light, and we wouldn't even be able to see the body. So we kind of need to break things down to understand, like holding on to a of a light ray to just get an idea of what it looks like. And if you keep going, of course, you get these intersection points off the body, in the body, all over. And I began to realize this is what the body was showing me. It was not a slow and painless process because it brought so many moments of like blissful insight and also total confusion. And then I would be touching a body and things would jerk and move and show me things. Like, it's just amazing how alive the body is. I know that sounds crazy, but it really is doing its own thing, and it's fascinating. And I'm just going to show you this idea again in that you saw in the video, of the idea of, so a fractal is a pattern that repeats itself at different scales. We have these trillions of cells, and then we have chakras, and then we have planets, and it's all being run by frequencies that of course would be one and the same with one another, and that creates the whole cosmos. And that's really what we're in the exploration of where the as above meets the so below, and really beginning to understand when we say all is one, what that means. So let's just take a very brief journey through the body and how this kind of geometry is created and what I mean by geometry. So we have to have electrical impulses. We have these electrical impulses, or these light refractions that are running things in the body. And so I pointed out these three levels, these three lines through the body. Now, they really relate to, this is the bladder meridian up the back, which you would wonder, why is the bladder meridian so important that it would have so much real estate in the whole nervous system running? But meridians are coupled. And so bladder is coupled with kidney, and kidney is like your battery pack of the body. It's the bottle of wine we're given at birth, you know, and some of us are given Blanc and some of us are given Chateauneuf de Pape. And I guess we'd call that genetics, right? And you can pour it out bit by bit, or you can splash it around and share it with all your friends. And that's really just how we're dealing with lifestyle techniques, and how we take care of ourselves, and how we expend our energies and our sexual energies. And are we containing and allowing, containing is not a good word. Are we allowing them to culminate and grow, or are we just throwing them all out from outside of us? Are we eating well? Are we breathing well? Are we taking care of ourselves? And that kidney pack, it's kind of like the Buddhists say, you only have so many breaths given to you at birth, so breathe slowly. And so this kidney energy is like that. They call it Jing in Chinese medicine. And it is coupled with bladder, running the water systems of the body to a large degree. And therefore the fluid of life through the body. And so these three areas up the back represent the bladder meridian, but they also represent the Nadis of Ayurvedic medicine, which you may be familiar with. And this is where the whole concept of Kundalini and life force that is in our sexual organs in the lower pelvis, speaking to the middle of the brain, or what they call the Brahmarandra, and this snake-like movement of life force through the body that we view as the life cycle, which you'll see in a moment too. So the three nadis in the body are Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, running up the center. And it's important that we recognize that there's three lines in the body, because if we're really seeing a 3D vortex through the body of how energy runs, the very center, the Sushumna space, just like a tornado, has the eye of the storm in the middle of it. It's the most quiet, the most silent, and yet the most powerful at the same time. And yet it requires to have these boundary spaces on the outside of it in order to contain that which is most powerful and be part of the power at the same time. And if you wanted to just flatten it and draw it flat, it would just be three lines. So we're looking at a very core essence of an energetic description of the central running of the body that we would call the nervous system. Now, this is a couple of different things. The orange relates to a meridian called the Sanjiao in the body, or a triple heater. There's an upper, middle, and lower burner. And I'm not going to go into the details of that so much, except to say that what I find interesting particularly, because triple heater is a hard one for us to really understand in the West, and we don't really have it all worked out, so to speak, when we're studying it. There's different concepts and different ways that we can interpret it. The way I interpret it, that I find really interesting, is that the body, and we'll go over this in a minute, the body mirrors itself everywhere. And so I'll save that for a later slide. But suffice to say that the upper, middle, and lower pertains to upper, middle, and lower everywhere throughout the body. So when I work on somebody's body and I feel just their calves, I can tell what I'm pretty much going to find in their torso and where things are blocked based on what I find in their calves, because we are mirrored everywhere. And I will explain that a little bit more in a moment. So of course, we're taking these images and we're looking at them from the inside, not just blotches or circles on the back or the front, which we tend to look at with aspects of what chakras are. And the same thing with the lines on the body. So we're starting to look inside as opposed to just on the body, and really bringing our vision in that this sunshine, this energy is radiating from the inside out. Now, what these show here, I forgot to mention, is that there are bands and ways that we function on a strictly musculoskeletal practical level in the body. And they're really vertical and horizontal striations through the muscle in order for us to be able to swallow, in order for peristalsis to happen, in order for babies to get born. There's the whole, we're really kind of, it's not a pretty analogy, but we're kind of like worms. So there are these muscular striations that move across and muscular striations that move down the body. And so we were looking at the three vertical lines, and your muscles will follow that too. But there's also these horizontal lines. And so I pointed out the three levels. These other white lines here, ocular, oral, throat, shoulder, chest, diaphragm, abdominal, and pelvic. These are areas that a man named Wilhelm Reich discovered. He's a big, long story. I give whole talks just on him because he's so interesting. And basically, he was a pattern thinker before pattern thinking was understood. And he was a doctor and branching into areas of science that hadn't been branched into before, and was getting a lot of flack for it. But he came out with some really brilliant work. And it's so varied, the work that he did, because he was a pattern thinker. Now, when we say pattern thinker, fractal is a word that we use today to say that a pattern will repeat itself at different scales. And that's what pattern thinking is. And pattern thinking exists everywhere. So even down to our psychology, why do we keep doing the same thing? Maybe we have the same relationship, type of relationship, and yet the people are different and the situations are different. And yet this same pattern keeps coming up. And until you crack the code of the pattern, you can't crack and shift a change of your psyche and how you're functioning. But fractals and patterns repeat in nature. They're how life source is running in a lot of ways, Fibonacci sequences and cycles. So there's a lot in the geometry world that really helps explain things. So Wilhelm Reich was a very brilliant man who saw a lot of different patterns and one of my favorite things he said was, I've really only ever learned one thing. And he opened and closed his hand this way. So it's this pulsation of life, this repetition of pulsation that iterates on larger and larger scales. And what this represents are the tension bands that he found that ran through the body. Now, he was taking people's bodies and touching them back in the day. He was a contemporary of Freud's. He was Freud's student. And that was back in the day where you weren't even supposed to be looking at your client. And there was certainly no touch allowed. And he was even taking people's clothes off to see skin coloring. And so he was very radical. But what he really came out that serves us so well in the somatic field is that it allowed an understanding that there are actually bands of tension that run through the body. And this is very true. And it's important in understanding when you're working on other people, how to recognize where these bands are in that way. So if we move over into where, jumping over a bunch of ideas, into where these vertical and horizontal lines intersect, these 6 points down the body actually are very significant. And again, there's a fractal nature to it. So this is just taking a snapshot of the torso. So let's consider for a moment, if you have, I don't know if you can see my cursor. I can't even see my cursor. Where'd it go? Anyway, if you have a shoulder pain, for instance, you know where your shoulder usually hurts you up there between your neck and your actual shoulder itself. There's this little space there, and it'll be very connected to your neck pain. And you might not necessarily know why. You think it's just because you slept in a draft. But there's a big difference between just pressing on the surface and recognizing that the connection is actually deep inside here, and that this is what's pulling. When we start to see ourselves as fabric, as frequency and motion and fabric that pulls depending on where our breath is, which is depending upon what our mind is thinking of. There are these pulls inside the body. And that pull, just like if I pull on my shirt or if I pull on my scarf here, it actually pulls in the very same area that you might feel pain. And so it makes a difference where you're thinking. It makes a difference how you're relating to your sensory experience. And it makes a difference as a therapist too. When you're touching a body, we get trained to think in certain ways. In shiatsu, we're trained to think about meridians and as well as muscles. In massage, people are trained to really focus on the origin and insertion of muscles. And we're really only thinking an inch skin deep, particularly. And so it really helps to be able to, even next time you have a shoulder pain, to press into it, feel where it is, but then think into the center of it and think right down into points on your chest here on each side. Now they're like, it's like this is the vortex of the spiral, which is your life force. And of course there's congestion here. This is where we primarily hold and breathe in, and then we pull in. But to get to these points here, even points on the side of the arm are very, very connected to what's going on in here. So it starts to change the map work a little bit, quite significantly, really, of instead of just thinking anatomically, instead of just thinking energetically, instead of just thinking fascia, we're looking at where does the primary grid system come from? And that is a question of frequency. And so my work is about helping people unlock tensions in their own body through somatic stretch. This is where I teach a couple of times a week, and helping therapists accentuate and amplify their treatment results by understanding how to bring their tools to the table and actually think more to core. Now, I was talking about different kinds of patterns that exist in the body. This is the homunculus, and this is our brain. And there's a whole person in the brain there. There's actually two different people in the brain there in relation to how we respond physiologically. So Wilder Penfield is the one who discovered this mostly, and he would stimulate these different parts of the brain and discover that there's actually a whole body that you can relate to different points of the body just through the brain. So the brain is mirroring the body. And there are a number of different examples actually in Western science that are now finally coming out that you can also find online. It's not easy, but you can still find it these days. It's coming out more and more. And so this idea that your hand or your eye or your ear or your foot is a mirror of the whole body suddenly becomes a little bit less esoteric, because it doesn't really make sense that only certain parts of the body would be mirroring the whole body. If parts of the body are mirroring the body, then it would more stand to reason that the entire body is mirroring every other part. And that's what the body taught me. And that gave me the understanding of fractals before I even knew what the word was. And I just love coincidences in the world, because I was lost in the body one day and all of a sudden I just saw this concept and I understood how everything was mirroring everything else. And I was fascinated. And somebody had subscribed me to, a friend of mine had subscribed me to a literary magazine that arrived in the mail the next day. And I opened it up and I'm flipping through, and there was a whole article on fractals in this literary magazine. And all of a sudden I had a word to explain what it was that I had seen in the body. And then it just all kind of took off from there. Fractal is now a word that you hear a lot. They have fractal eyeshadow. They have fractal cars. They have things that are not fractal at all about anything. It's just a cool word now, and everybody's selling something fractal. So it's happened really quickly, how we've gone from not knowing the word at all to actually hearing it so ubiquitously that it doesn't even make sense. But it's out there. And so you can tell that that's sort of just in our, we're all getting the same memo, really. So taking a look at, if you whittle down this shape, now what began to happen was a geometry started to form itself, which very much surprised me. Again, I cannot stress enough how much I despised math class and did not do well in it at all in high school. I just, even now, numbers happen and I just glaze over. So there's some brilliant people in the field like Nassim, like Robert Edward Grant, and different people who are working specifically with numbers. And I get the pictures. I get the pictures and I can speak geometry now, but there's just something about the numbers that don't really seem to work. So I was fascinated to discover that a geometry started to form itself. Now this is a 2D image, but it really represents planes. And I'm going to show you the geometry that comes out of it. as we go through this. Now, if you take away all of the points, and again, I was trying to whittle down to what is the core thing I'm feeling. I'd be working on a wrist and things would be coming up. I'd be working on the neck, on the head, on the ankles. But there were these 3 lines. There were all these different, it was a very long process of sensory awareness and then reading everything I could find in order to make some sort of logical sense of what I was feeling. Because I was feeling a bit crazy because nobody else was relating to the same things. And there's really only so long you can start seeing and thinking one way and not have anybody else make any sense of it before you start to think that you're the problem. So sometimes it was kind of like, what's going on? But I was whittling it down to what is the core idea here. And I think this is a video. Yeah. And so this is one version of the core idea. But as you saw in the other video too, with the 3 lines on the head, and that if you're actually showing depth, this triangular version is very much, it makes sense one way as it does the other. The planes of energy were running not just in one direction, but also in the other direction. And that was giving me access to core areas of the body that in treatment, when I would touch somebody and work on them, and well, I won't go into the therapeutics of how I was doing it, but the nervous system would jump and release. They'd pass out cold. I always say I like my clients unconscious because that's when you can really start to communicate with the nervous system. And their bodies would jerk and release, and a lot of tension would be thrown off really from the nervous system. It's the nervous system holding the muscles. So you can work the muscles as much as you want, but if you're not communicating with the nervous system, you're not communicating with the control. And therefore you're not controlling, you're not working with communicating with the mind of the person that is controlling. And sometimes those controls don't want to let go. But when the person is in a really deep alpha state and you're communicating directly with the nervous system, it gives them the opportunity to make a subconscious decision of how much they're actually willing to let go of. And in that way, you can actually read the psychology of the mind of the person in a lot of ways too. So again, this is also something that works for your own body, not just working on other people. But because this is a dual idea, it makes this hexagonal shape in the body. Now, remember, this is fractal. This is just trying to grab onto a light beam to show a concept. It exists within the body, but it also exists within the finger. And if you want to see what it actually, first of all, I was very upset when I found out that it was geometry that I was looking at, because I figured that was the end of the line. I just spent so many years focused on something to understand things that brought me up to the very thing I was worst at in the world scholastically. I thought, that's it. I can't go any further. That was an interesting journey and it's leading nowhere. And then I started to meet people who are dear friends and colleagues today, like Jonathan Quinton and Marshall Lefferts, and then eventually got to know Nassim Haramein. And all of these people and their work taught me the language to be able to understand what I was seeing. So I don't speak physics and I don't speak numbers, but I speak geometry, and you can have some really heady philosophical conversations geometrically. It's fascinating to me. So when I actually found somebody to create the shape, this is what got pulled out of the body. And I'm just checking time. And it fascinated me because I didn't realize it was actually this precise. And what's remarkable that's happened to me this week is I've had 2 different geometers show up in my life and prove this geometry. Now, I didn't really know that a geometry needed to be proven, but of course it would. That makes sense. And it's like, you can't have a mathematical idea without proving that the math is going to work. And geometry does the same thing. So 2 different people who don't know each other at all showed up last week in my studio here and proved this geometry. They just were interested in my shape. They're interested in geometry and showed that it stands up to analysis, really. And what that means is that you have to be able to have certain things like phi and different things within there that will stand up. If you angle it and turn it, it won't just disintegrate. It doesn't dissolve as an idea. It actually holds up. And so this is a really fascinating, when David said, like, what would I be doing with more money? I would be sitting down and really spending a lot of time. I do this anyway in my life, but talking to people about this and finding out more and more about it. There's a lot involved in this shape that I would love to share, but now is not the time. But it really does show kind of like a pump sort of action. What I will show you is the work. I offered this in a presentation when I gave a talk at the Resonant Science Foundation, which is Nassim Haramein's Foundation. He is working on the holy grail of physics in defining the relativistic world in relation to the quantum world. And when we can do that, then we can do what's called pulling from the vacuum. And so for those people that it might not make a lot of sense if I say that, that means there's an over here and there's an over there. There's an over there that we came from, and then we showed up over here, and then we go back over there, and we don't know what over there is. And it seemed like it was totally empty and called a vacuum, but now it seems like it's filled with absolutely everything. And so when we get into, breakthrough technologies, for instance, are involved in trying to find ways that we cannot rape fossil fuels from the earth and have a limited supply of energy, but to be able to kind of bleed from the vacuum. We're obviously a bleed from the vacuum. And so how can you actually access that energy? And when these worlds come together, our technologies radically change. So people like Nassim are working a lot on breakthrough technology. Now, this is what's interesting. This is called his tetrahelix, and it works on a clockwise, counterclockwise rotation, and a lot of physics in order to be able to run water through and pull water from charge the water from the vacuum. And what they've been doing, and I'm showing this because he gave me permission to show this when I gave my talk. So you can see the tetrahelixes there are lined up, and they grow plants based on different test studies in order to be able to see and prove that they are indeed pulling from the vacuum. So what's really interesting, and I love this because this is how geometry is poetry. The image of Nassim's tetrahelix on one side looks very much like my image. My image, I know, is very much like a pump. And I just think it's so beautiful that there's a very left brain idea and a very right brain sensory experience that actually comes in and shows much the same sort of thing. And this is why I find this shape so interesting in the body, and that when we're working with certain nodes of where these intersection points are, the nervous system responds, releases, and more energy is provided to the body, it appears. So enough words for the moment. I just want to give you an idea of how this relates to your inner body. In looking at the idea of this shape and traveling, let's say, in through your spinal cord here. And then all these points that lead are pulls in the hip that then pull down the legs. And you can see these rays of light that move through, because we're not just linear. We're a living entity. And so I use this shape to represent a connection between the creative center and the creative center, between the throat and the lower body. And I believe it spins very much, holding that kind of vortex in the body. And then, of course, is indicative of being the center of the toroidal structure. The torus is the life force energy around, whether it's a cell or a body or an apple or a planet. There is this life force. It would be the Schumann resonance really around the earth. And so that's where all of this work has led me, in understanding or listening more to the body and sharing the frequencies of what are actually running us. And in understanding frequency and laying over geometry, we can see a real unification between Eastern and Western philosophies that really point to a very different kind of science and health in the future that I believe will be much more preventative and provide many more solutions that we don't currently have, and that we can really gain from the West, from the East and the West. So again, we're looking at light in the body, and the Art of Clay Taylor.com for this incredible kind of work that he does. And I just love how you can see the three lines that get created through the sphere, and how that completely matches what it is when you're looking at the bladder meridian down the back too. So all food for thought. I'm just going to run through quickly and show you a little bit about my work and what I do. So this is the Fractal Anatomy and Geometry of Healing program. This is a whole landing page you can go through, and you would find it on my website at geometryofhealing.com. You just go down to that little green bar, and you can see all about that 25 years of my research in there. And you can also see where it says sign up for a free video on fractal anatomy. That's my geometry newsletter list. And then next to it is my somatic stretch newsletter list. And they're both pretty different. I teach class, so you can click on those and you can sign up if you're interested in hearing from me and the kind of work that I'm doing, share more information about the somatic stretch and about geometry and upcoming courses and events that I have going on. Usually I do workshops, and hopefully that will be happening back in the world again soon. Now I teach live classes every week, a couple of times a week. And I started just streaming online and offering them for free and by donation when COVID started, because I think that everybody should be able to access information about how to help their own health and healing, and not everyone can pay for it. So it's run sheerly by the generous donations of people to be able to keep me teaching and also really help support a lot of people who are not able to pay anything at all. So on this page, if you go to Geometry of Healing and then you go to online stretch class, you can sign up for the live classes, or you can scroll down, and I always upload, like I taught this morning, there's another class down there. And also my mother, who's 90, has been teaching some classes now that I'm back helping her here right now. So I do encourage you to check those out. They rotate every week. I'm not sure how long my mother's going to be teaching for. She's been pretty tired. But I also have a membership program that you'll see on that page that allows you to see the last 8 classes that you can work with, and you can download any of them for a low monthly thing. So that's available to you as well. And these stretch classes allow you to really get into your body and understand how to work with the stretch reflex in a different way, and find this really the 0 point field in your own body, this place where you're just feeling what's easy and where pleasure is, and you're starting to notice where you meet resistance. And usually our mind misses that and we shoot past and try to get to a goal. So we're retraining our brain to recognize a very powerful area of the body that helps us really unlock tensions really powerfully. And of course, I weave in the idea of fractal material as well, because I'm all about that. And then that is my mother. And we have somaticstretch.com, which is the base for where if you want to learn about the training that we do, we have a whole training section. And that's what I am headlining and leading. And we are, we've been running at the same program cost for the last 10 years. And so in 2022, in January, those fees will be going up. But right now, people are still able to absorb that and do some training at the same cost, and then start anytime next year if you're interested in that. So that training is for people who not only want to teach, but for people who just want to learn about their own body. It's kind of like a one-on-one, really inexpensive coaching training for people, rather than having the problem of it being so much every month. It's just a really great way to get into your body and help work out your own glitches and feel really wonderful, and get some great tools to keep your body really young and healthy, which you can see works when you see my mom. That's her at probably 80 by now. I'd say she's 90 today. And also on the Resonant Science Foundation, Jonathan Quinton, dear friend of mine, and I have been running some microcosm and macrocosm talks, and hopefully those will continue as well. So that's Nassim Haramine's platform, resonanceacademy.org. And so I'm really interested in just interviewing people within the field, sharing a lot of information, taking the big concepts of it and whittling it down in a way that people can really absorb the material and get really involved in it, because it's fascinating when you start learning about the world of geometry and all it means. And then finally, my work that I call neural resonance therapy is the kind of work that allows therapists to understand how to work on their clients' bodies in this way. So all of that information is available at my website on geometryofhealing.com. And I am available to ask any questions of too. You can email me at sands, like the beach, SANDS, at templebody.com. Thanks very much for your time.
Cool. Jonathan Quinton is going to be presenting in the conference here too, as well.
Yeah, I know, which is great. Jonathan's awesome. He helped me understand a lot about the geometry. He was definitely one of the first people that I met who I saw him give a talk, and I was so excited, and I jumped all over him afterwards. I was like, yeah, I've got these things I want to talk about. And he really helped me a lot.
You know, it's interesting. In my math class, I did well in math, but I had no idea and still don't know why we learned it.
Yeah.
right? I mean, what was the point? And normally people don't learn things unless there's a reason, or why lend a brain cell to it if there's no reason to learn it, right?
Yeah.
But the main thing about geometry is really interesting, of course, is when it's too complex for the left brain to handle. So the left brain just shuts down. It goes through too much information, right? And the right brain takes over and just sees the whole thing as a whole and all its parts at the same time. Right? That's so cool, because then when you work in that right brain mode, then it's actually, there's much more you can do. What's interesting is I start thinking of, balancing the left and right brain to be able to find the frequencies of the nodes in those geometries. And once you find or assign a frequency, which there's not really an easy way to do this, but to find a frequency of one of the sides, one of the bars of the geometry, then you have a musical interval relationship to all the other bars. Like Randy Masters took the Sri Yantra and measured all the sides of the triangles and created chimes based on the musical interval relationships of the length of the sides of the triangle. So you could do the exact same thing with the geometries. So you find the actual you have to assign a length to a certain frequency, and then you see the relationship of that to all the others. And that's really cool, because I think with the work that I'm doing, to be able to actually measure a frequency somewhere in the meridians or in your the rhythm of your brain, the rhythm of your heart, the rhythm of your breath when you're in the zone, there's going to be some relationship to a core frequency that everything else is based on for that person. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing from what you're doing, I'm seeing, I don't quite have it figured out, right? But I'm seeing a way of actually running a song through that geometry with sound, right? Wow. Because the flow is the deal. And as you said, you see it as a spiral flow. And it was interesting because just last year, I got a download that was like, okay, what's the song of a flowing torus, right? And it's interesting because you can think of the flowing torus, which is not very interesting as a song. It's kind of like, it's almost just an up and down. But when you add the spiral in the torus, right, now you've got a really interesting, it's like, right? It becomes really interesting. And so I started thinking, okay, because that, because when I talk, my thing is flow. It's all about smooth flow through the system. Blockages are the problem, right? So I think, okay, the ultimate smooth flow is that spiral through the torus, right? That there's no better smooth flow because that ties into the way things flow. So if you're going to do flow, you just got to find the notes of the nodes within that flow, which you've got mapped in the geometry, the nodes really. And then you just have to find the tempo. And that's not going to be too hard because you can measure the tempo of the heart, brain, and breath when you're in the zone, right? So I'm seeing it's a little ways off, and it might need a few extra downloads. Okay, guys, come on, help out. Might need some extra downloads on how it will work. But I'm starting to see, because with this map of musical interval relationships within the body and different flows through the 11 systems, if you map it to a system that's more like the geometry of the body and the meridians and the whole electromagnetic and the auras and everything, then it's gonna work way better. And it's gonna tie because this is the big problem that everybody's having, is to figure out the relationship between the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual and the whole universe.
Right.
But it seems that you're onto it, right? So really,
I'm moving back to California and coming and hanging out with you.
right? It's like we gotta get a bunch of people in a room and just don't come out until we've healed every disease in the world.
Exactly. But this is what I mean when I say like that sound healing is really coming to the forefront, because as we are getting into it, you can see how sound naturally is a part of it. And I love music, and in a different life, I'd love to be a musician. And so I have my harmonium and I start chanting and toning, and it's like, it just feels right in the body. And it helps me open up these inner areas too. So I'm really excited to meet you and find out more about your work and your accreditation that you're doing. And I'm definitely going to come hang out and get a bunch of people. We'll lock ourselves in, as you say, and figure it all out, not come out till it's done.
It makes me think about the people like, what's his name? The people that can manifest something in their hand, Sai Baba.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
What they're doing is taking the geometry or the sound of the geometry and making it with an intention, with the sound, to manifest it in physical form.
Yeah. I keep seeing that Hogwarts schools are what's coming up. You know, we're not going to just learn math, kind of linear thing, but there's going to be all of these young kids learning how to use their minds for telepathy. And, you know, yes, you can hear people's thoughts, and you weren't just crazy, you know, and just learning things like that. And they'll be like Hogwarts 501, where they'll be manifesting things in their hands.
Right.
I hope we're still alive when that's happening. It'll be so fun.
Oh, you know, what I see that could be really cool is I'm working on a virtual reality system where you can put on a helmet and look down and see a graphic of inside of your body.
Oh my God.
So you could actually take exactly what you're doing and run that spot. I mean, even with what you have right now, it'd be really effective. I mean, imagine looking down inside your body and seeing that whole geometry with the spinning and everything. It's like, okay, and you got a sound going with it. It's like, even if it didn't do anything, it'd be fun.
Yeah,
but it could do right. But it could totally do something, right?
Yay! I love that idea. That would be so cool.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you for all the inspirations and for the opportunities. It's really great. I'm really happy to meet you.
Well, thank you for all your work and pulling this all together, because I think the potential here is really huge, and it's just an honor what you're doing, and appreciate it.
Thank you. You too. Absolutely. I am coming to Sausalito one day soon, and I'm going to definitely be hanging out with you for a bit.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and play the final closing video. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David. Many blessings.